Today's May the 4th, so we're going to make some Star Wars pendants. So roll the music. And that's about all I can use without getting in a lot of trouble. So, I'll be making two pendants today, one Rebel symbol and one Empire symbol, and I'll be giving them away at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. So I'll be using a jeweler saw to cut out these pieces, and I'm using label paper as my pattern so I can stick it to my metals so I have guides. I got the patterns for these on Google, and then I traced them in Illustrator and made my own and resized them and then printed them. I'm not going to provide them because of copyright problems, so you could do the same as I did if you want these patterns and if you want to make these for yourself. So all I have to do is peel these off like stickers and stick them to the metal. So whenever using patterns like this on metal, make sure that the pattern has a lot of extra material so it covers more area than you're actually going to be cutting. This way you can cut the piece out and it doesn't run the risk of it popping off from the saw blades and then you losing where your drawing is. So the Empire symbol is a little bit more complex than the Rebel symbol, so you might want to practice on something like a penny. So all you're going to want to do is cut around the head, and you could drill a hole in the center or you can cut from the outside, and it's just to practice so you can get used to cutting the fine little details and changing around your direction with a saw blade. So once you have a hole in your penny, you can string your saw blade through it and then reset the saw blade like you normally would and make sure that the blade is nice and tight. You'll have to be careful doing this on heavier pieces like our Empire symbol because you can actually bend and break your blade. And like I said, make sure that the blade is nice and tight when you have it all reset. So I'm going to be using Pro Cut as a lubricant for my blade, but you can use beeswax or whatever you already use as a lubricant. So the best advice I can give for using the jeweler saw is always be moving it up and down as straight as possible, and you cannot turn without moving up and down, so don't make any sharp turns or you'll just snap the blade in half. And you're going to break a lot of blades learning how to use it. Also be very careful not to cut yourself because it will go right through your finger. The reason why I suggest using coins for practice is they're very cheap. They have lots of details on them that you can cut around for practice and you don't have to worry about drawing something onto it. And that's about it. And they're also pretty small for the most part, so you get to work in a very small area. I also make sure to try to keep my area pretty clean, so blowing off any of the metal filings or flakes really helps me out because it makes it hard to see with them all there. So that's enough with the penny and all the practicing. Let's get on to the part that you actually came for, which is the Imperial symbol. So we're going to need a center punch because we're going to be making a bunch of holes and we don't want the drill to move around on the piece. As you can see, there's a lot of points where we're going to have to drill through. So I'm just going to drill these out on my bench pen with the smallest drill bit I can get away with inside of the pattern lines. Once that's all done, we'll be able to use the same technique I showed on the penny to cut the rest of this out, but you just have to thread it through the holes multiple times and cut up multiple parts. If you're curious about what blades I'm using for my jeweler saw, I'll have a link in the description showing where I got them and what size they are. And so far, these are the best ones that I've been able to find, and they seem to last the longest too. So now, once all the inside of this is cut out, I can cut the outside of it. And the reason why I do it this way is it makes it a lot easier to handle when you have the larger piece of copper to hold in your hand versus having a smaller coin, even though I practice with coins, but still. So another good rule of thumb is to keep whatever part you're working on and wanting to keep, like the middle of this, on the bench pen as secure as possible so it doesn't bend or warp or get caught on anything. So with all that done, we can move on to the Rebel symbol, which is much easier to cut out. Also keep in mind that this brass is almost double the thickness of the copper. So now they're both done, we'll just have to quickly remove all of the paper so we can see exactly what we're working with. So now that I have these pieces done, I'm going to make the back plates for them. So basically I just made circles that are bigger than the emblems, and then we just have to cut them out. When cutting with a jeweler saw, it leaves a pattern around the edge, and it's also pretty sharp, so I'm going to take it down with a file. So for the inner parts, I'm going to use some diamond burrs to cut it all away. And for the last bit, I'm going to be using a sanding wheel that is 220 grit to get any other burrs that could be sticking up or sharp edges to go away. So the next thing I'm going to do is put flux on the back of these two pieces and put solder onto them. The reason why I'm soldering them like this is because I'm using silver solder on brass and copper. This way I'll hide between the two pieces and hopefully not come out too much, so cleanup won't be that hard. If your solder doesn't flow properly during this process, go ahead and pickle the piece, and then reflux the whole thing and try it again. While I'm waiting for those to pickle, I'm going to make some jump rings because we're going to solder one to the top of the back plate. I'm going to be using 16 gauge wire in copper and brass. If you're not familiar with making jump rings, I will link to a video in the description and in a card at the top of the video. When sawing these jump rings, make sure to be careful not to cut yourself. Also, keep in mind that they're going to get very warm. And once I have the jump rings, I'm going to take one of each of them and cut them in half, because this is going to be soldered onto our back plate. So when soldering these rings onto the back plates, you're going to want to use hard solder. And typically you'd want to use a medium or easy solder on the first pieces we soldered, but I used hard on accident, so I'm going to have to be very careful when putting all this together. So to finish soldering everything, I'm going to be using my tripod and a mesh screen so I can heat the pieces from underneath and on top. And I make sure to flux the backs of the symbols and the tops of the back plates. When heating everything up, you're going to want to do it as uniform as possible, and be very careful because brass will melt before the copper does, and with them being under and over one another, you have to move your flame around a lot. Once it heats up to the proper temperature, the solder will flow and you'll be able to see it around the edges of the symbols. Once you believe you're done, go ahead and quench these and check them. If there's any spots that are still raised or if there's no solder there, go ahead and pickle the pieces and then redo this process again. You can add a little bit of solder if you need to, but I would suggest just putting flux all over the piece again and reheating it and seeing if you can push down the raised pieces, or you can even hammer them down beforehand. So after taking these out of my pickling solution, I'm going to use some sanding discs on them to clean them up and remove any unwanted solder. These particular sanding discs are really good for getting inside of little areas that you normally wouldn't be able to get into, and they range anywhere from 60 grit all the way up to 1000. So I'll have a link in the description showing where I got these and which ones I use exactly. The overall finish I'm going for is kind of a worn, used look that is kind of shiny, so sort of brushed metal, but with some divots and stuff in it to add character to these. So before moving through the rest of the grits of the sanding wheels, I'm going to put the jump rings onto them so they get the same finish. And then I'm going to finish it all up with a steel wire wheel to get the final shiny brass and copper look I want, along with the tiny scratches from the brushed look. So here's the finished product. If you want to give them a shot, go for it, and feel free to send me a picture showing what you made. And if you don't want to do that, or if you just want these ones, now is the time to tell you about how to win one. Entering this contest is very simple. All you need to do is be subscribed to this channel, like this video, and leave a comment on this video, but make sure you let me know which one you want. I will randomly pick 2 winners and announce their names in a short video on May the 11th, 2018. If you need any additional information or you want to read the rules, they'll be in the description below. So best of luck to everyone, and may the 4th be with you. Thanks for watching my video, and see you guys next time.